In August of 1227, the most powerful man who had ever lived died in secret, deep inside enemy territory. What happened next was so ruthless that 8 centuries later, with satellites and ground-penetrating radar, nobody has ever found where they put his body. Every soldier who escorted the body home was reportedly killed. Every slave who dug the grave was killed. Then the men who killed them were killed too, until no living person could ever point to the spot. This is the story of the tomb of Genghis Khan, the man who built history's largest connected land empire, stretching across 2 continents, and the deliberate, brutal, multi-layered secrecy that has kept his grave lost for 800 years, even from the most advanced search technology on the planet. He was born around 1162 on the Mongolian steppe as Temujin, the son of a minor clan chief poisoned by rivals while he was still a boy, leaving his family destitute and hunted. By his 20s he had survived enslavement, exile, and betrayal, and slowly built alliances tribe by tribe until, in 1206, a great assembly of chieftains proclaimed him Genghis Khan, ruler of all Mongols. Within 2 decades his armies had conquered more territory than Rome managed in 4 centuries, stretching from the Pacific coast of China to the Caspian Sea. He built that empire on speed, discipline, and terror, but he also built it on an old steppe belief: nature itself was sacred, and a ruler's body belonged back inside the earth, unmarked. That belief would decide everything about what happened to his own body, and why, unlike almost every other conqueror in history, from Egypt's pharaohs to Rome's emperors, he left behind no monument, no marker, no name carved anywhere, to show where he was laid to rest. In 1227, in his 60s, Genghis Khan was leading a campaign against the Western Xia kingdom in what is now northern China when he fell fatally ill, or, by one persistent legend, fell from his horse. The secret history of the Mongols, the oldest surviving Mongol chronicle, is vague on the exact cause, written by people who may have deliberately not wanted to record it. Later legends grew stranger: a captured queen hiding a blade, a poisoned wound that would not heal, even a curse tied to the very campaign that killed him. None can be verified. What is certain is that his commanders now had a crisis on their hands. The greatest ruler on earth was dead, in hostile territory, hundreds of miles from the Mongol heartland, surrounded by a kingdom his own armies had just spent months besieging. If word spread before a successor was chosen, rival tribes, defeated kingdoms, and ambitious sons could tear the empire apart before it even finished digesting its conquests. So his generals made a decision that would define this story more than anything else: nobody outside their inner circle could be allowed to know that Genghis Khan was dead. Not yet. The funeral procession carried his body more than 1,000 miles back toward Mongolia, and every chronicle agrees on one brutal detail: any person the procession encountered along the way, herder, traveler, entire villages, was killed on the spot, so word could never travel ahead of them. Modern historians debate how literally to take that claim, but the fact that it was written down and believed at all tells you something about how far these men were willing to go. Mongol custom already leaned toward secrecy. Unlike settled kingdoms that raised pyramids, mausoleums, and stone monuments to their dead rulers, the steppe tradition called for a body returned quietly to open earth: no marker, no name. Common Mongols were buried this way for generations, wrapped simply, placed in the ground, and left to be reclaimed by grass within a season or 2. For a Khan whose name would soon be feared from Korea to Hungary, and whose descendants would rule from Beijing to Baghdad, his family took that same steppe humility and multiplied it into something closer to a military operation. According to the traditions recorded by later chroniclers, the body was finally brought to a region the family already considered the most sacred place on earth. Digging the actual grave, historians say, fell to a crew of laborious, sometimes recorded as slaves, who had no idea whose tomb they were building until the work was already done. Later chronicles, written generations afterward and impossible to fully verify, claim as many as 800 workers finished the grave and were then killed on the spot by a smaller detachment of soldiers. Those soldiers, the story goes, numbered around 40. Once their task was finished, they too were killed, this time by an even smaller, trusted handful who alone knew the truth. Whether that exact chain of killings happened precisely as later legend describes it, the core claim, that the secrecy was layered on purpose, deliberately narrowing who could ever know, appears again and again in the record. Even the innermost circle, family members who knew roughly where the grave lay, were reportedly bound by an oath never to reveal it, an oath some accounts say was kept for generations. No stone was raised. No temple was built. No inscription marked the spot. By design, there was nothing above ground at all for a future grave robber, rival warlord, or even a devoted descendant centuries later to find. Then came the detail that turns this from a quiet burial into a full erasure. Legend holds that 1,000 horsemen rode back and forth across the fresh grave, again and again, trampling the ground until it matched the plain around it exactly. Some later accounts add an even stranger layer, that trees, or an entire forest, were deliberately allowed or encouraged to grow over the site in the years after, until the grave vanished under root and canopy. Whether that forest grew by careful planning or by simple neglect over centuries, the effect was the same. Within a generation or two, there would have been nothing left on the surface to distinguish that patch of earth from 1,000 others. One further legend, harder still to verify, claims a nearby river or stream was diverted to run directly over the burial site, so that even careful digging in the right area would find only water and stone. True or embellished, these stories share one purpose, making absolutely certain that geography itself, not just human silence, would defend the grave. The place chosen for all of this was Burkhan Khaldun, a mountain in the Khentii range of northeastern Mongolia, and it was not chosen at random. As a young man named Temujin, decades before he became Genghis Khan, he had fled to this same mountain to escape enemies who wanted him dead, hiding among its cliffs and forests until the danger passed. He credited the mountain with saving his life, and by his own account prayed there afterward in gratitude, vowing to honor it for as long as his descendants lived. Decades later, as the most powerful man on earth, he is said to have asked to be returned to that exact mountain when he died, the one place that had once sheltered him. For his family, then, this was not just a secure hiding spot chosen for convenience. It was personal, sacred ground, chosen by the Khan himself decades earlier, long before anyone imagined he would one day need a grave there. To protect it, his successors did something almost unheard of. They declared a vast surrounding zone permanently off-limits, a restricted area known as the Ikh Khorig, the Great Taboo. Entering the Ikh Khorig without permission was punishable by death. Guardian clans, some accounts name the Darkhad, were assigned to patrol its borders for generations, an inherited, sacred duty passed down through families. For centuries, the taboo held, even during the height of the Mongol Empire's power, when Genghis Khan's descendants ruled from China to Persia, this one patch of forested mountain in their own homeland stayed forbidden ground. Nobody, not scholars, not pilgrims, not even most of the ruling family itself, was permitted to set foot inside its borders. That guarded silence outlasted the Mongol Empire itself, outlasted the Yuan dynasty in China, outlasted the Qing dynasty that followed, stretching across 7 centuries of Mongolian history in an unbroken chain of forbidden ground. The Venetian traveler Marco Polo, writing decades after Genghis Khan's death, recorded stories he had heard about Mongol royal funerals, including the claim that funeral escorts killed anyone they met on the road. Polo never claimed to know the tomb's exact location himself. He was recording second-hand steppe legend for a European audience that found it almost unbelievable, which is itself a sign of how far the story had already spread. By the time European explorers and traders began reaching Mongolia centuries later, the location of Genghis Khan's grave was already treated as unknowable even by local tradition, a secret that had genuinely, successfully, been lost. Empires rose and fell across Asia. Dynasties replaced dynasties. Maps were redrawn again and again. And still, generation after generation, nobody, not scholars, not soldiers, not even the Khan's own distant descendants, could point to the spot with any confidence. In the 20th century, Mongolia's Soviet-backed communist government inadvertently became the tomb's newest guardian, sealing the wider Khentii region as a restricted military zone for reasons that had nothing to do with Genghis Khan at all. For decades, ordinary Mongolians and foreign researchers alike were barred from the area, an accidental continuation of a 700-year-old taboo, just for entirely different, 20th-century political reasons. Only after Mongolia's democratic revolution in 1990 and the collapse of Soviet influence did the region slowly begin to open, and the modern hunt for the tomb of Genghis Khan finally, properly, began. The first serious attempt came quickly. A joint Japanese and Mongolian expedition nicknamed Gurvan Gol spent years in the early 1990s surveying the region with ground surveys and early remote sensing. They mapped ancient sites and burial mounds across the Khentii range but found no confirmed trace of the Khan's own grave before funding and permissions ran out. A wealthy American commodities trader named Maury Kravitz became fixated on the mystery after reading about it decades earlier, and eventually spent a fortune and years of his life funding search expeditions of his own. His team, working with Mongolian and international scientists through the 2000s, used aerial photography and geophysical surveys, hoping technology could succeed where centuries of legend had kept everyone else out. In 2010, a different team, led by American engineer and explorer Albert Lin from the University of California, tried an entirely new approach: search without ever putting a shovel in the ground. His project combined high-resolution satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and magnetometers with something unprecedented: thousands of ordinary volunteers online, invited to scan satellite photos from home and flag anything that looked man-made. The crowdsourced search flagged more than 2,000 possible sites of interest across the wider region, an overwhelming number for any ground team to check by hand. Follow-up ground surveys and non-invasive radar scans, conducted with permission from local communities, did turn up genuinely ancient structures, walls, a moat-like enclosure, and burial features consistent with the 13th century. None of it, though, could be confirmed as the Khan's own grave. Every promising anomaly the surveys turned up eventually proved either inconclusive, a different and much later burial entirely, or simply natural terrain playing tricks on the radar. And crucially, the team made a decision early on that shaped everything: they would not dig. Not without direct permission from Mongolian authorities and local communities, and that permission was never fully granted. Local Mongolian tradition still treats Burkhan Khaldun and its surrounding region as profoundly sacred, and many Mongolians actively do not want the grave found and excavated at all. Old belief holds that disturbing Genghis Khan's rest would bring catastrophe, a warning taken seriously enough that it has shaped government policy, not just folk superstition. Mongolia's government has designated the wider Khentii region a strictly protected area, Khan Khentii, limiting development, tourism, and archaeological excavation alike, sacred ground defended now by law instead of soldiers. So today, the most technologically advanced search in the tomb's 800-year history stopped itself short, not because the tools failed, but because the culture that has guarded this secret for centuries asked researchers to stop. Meanwhile, a persistent misconception sends many casual searchers to entirely the wrong country. In Ordos, in Inner Mongolia, China, stands a grand complex known as the Genghis Khan Mausoleum. It is an impressive, genuinely important pilgrimage site, but it has never actually held his body. It was built centuries after his death as a shrine and cenotaph, not a burial place. The mausoleum does house relics associated with him: saddles, banners, ceremonial objects preserved and venerated by caretaker families for generations, treated as sacred even without the man's actual remains. Every year it draws thousands of visitors who come to honor his memory there, a real and moving act of devotion, just not, historians agree, anywhere near his actual grave. The real tomb, if the old accounts are accurate, still lies somewhere in the forested folds of the Khentii Mountains, roughly 400 miles to the north, in Mongolia proper. Modern researchers now widely agree on one striking point: the secrecy worked exactly as intended. No grave in history may have been engineered this deliberately, this many times over, to disappear. Unmarked burial, a killed funeral escort, executed grave diggers, executed executioners, trampling horses, a grown forest, possibly a diverted river, 7 centuries of an armed taboo zone, layer after layer, each one built to survive if another failed. Compare that to the fate of other famous rulers: looted pyramids, ransacked royal tombs, emperors whose graves became tourist attractions within centuries of their burial. Genghis Khan's family seems to have studied exactly that fate, and built a plan specifically designed to avoid it, centuries before anyone coined the term security in depth. And it has held. Through empires, through Soviet occupation, through satellites that can read a license plate from orbit, through crowdsourced armies of online volunteers, the exact resting place of one of history's most consequential men remains genuinely, completely unknown. Some Mongolians hope it stays that way permanently, a sacred secret rather than a solved one, the mountain left exactly as Temujin found it when it saved his life so long ago. 800 years after his death, in an age when almost nothing on Earth stays hidden for long, the grave of Genghis Khan still does, precisely because the people who buried him made absolutely certain it always would.